These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. Mr. Tyler Hauk.
Hello, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
Doing awesome. Yeah.
What are you up to this time of year?
This time of year is my off season from hunting season. My hunting season's about 4 to 5 months long, sometimes depending on the year. And by the time it's over, I occasionally get the question from people, is it still fun? Are you still having fun guiding? And sometimes I say, give me a month or so to get a little bit of perspective on it and to think about this year and if I am still having fun. And, you know, my answer right now is yeah, I'm obviously having fun. The little bit of stress that comes along with being a hunting guide and that season stretching out and, you know, also doing my own hunts and then hunting with my friends on top of that, it gets long, but at this point in the year, after I have a little bit of perspective on it, I can't wait for hunting season to happen again.
Yeah.
Right?
When you're hunting with your friends, do you fall into a guide role?
I do automatically.
Yeah.
I can't not do it.
It's really tough not to, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really difficult. I have to, point, stop, like, hey, what's going on? To the point where a lot of times people that I've known for a long time, I'll, stop before we go out hunting and say, hey, what are you expecting? What are you looking for out of this hunt? Like the usual hunting guide talk to people that I've known for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends that I go out hunting with, I am the most experienced hunter out of that. And so they're asking me advice all the time on what we should do. And I've had the opportunity to teach a few people that are adult onset hunters, for lack of a better term, how to hunt. And it's interesting going through that process and, stepping outside of what you know and looking at it through the eyes of somebody that, is coming into it relatively blind and just is interested in it and wants to go out and at the bare minimum get some wild meat. That's usually where I start is doe seasons or cow elk seasons.
So is that going to be August?
It depends on the year, but it usually starts, the 24th through the 28th, somewhere in there, depending on the year for the Zumwalt cow seasons.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then that, for a long time, that went all the way until like the 21st of January.
Right.
This last year, they got rid of the last season and it ended just before Christmas.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I've always wanted to take the time to go down to ODF&W and ask them exactly why they did that. I don't have super strong feelings about it. I'm sure they had their reasons, but I would be curious why they did decide to do that.
Do you support it?
There's a couple different levels to look at it. It's hard to convince somebody of something that their wallet depends on, if it goes away.
Right.
So I was getting paid to be up there to patrol that season, and it was a great excuse for me to be up there.
Yeah.
It paid for my gas money. It paid for my time, a few days a week, if not more, to be up there. But I actually did prefer that season even to hunt for me personally in. And I can think of a few reasons why they did it. One would be access. It's difficult for people to get out here, especially after a couple years of heavy snows. It basically closed down the main Zumwalt Road, the main access to get up there to the hunting area. It closed that down and people were only able to come down, go down the main highway towards Imnaha and then kind of come up in a few key areas to be able to get to them. I've had people talk about how far along the cows are being pregnant and that as a downside.
That one is interesting to me.
I've had somebody bring that up, and it kind of sounded to me more like an emotional ploy than a actual biological reason to do or not do something.
Yeah, and there's places in the U.S. where people hunt elk into March.
Yeah,
and then that fetus is getting fairly big, and you can really tell like this is a baby elk. But if you kill a cow elk on September 28th, it probably has a fertilized egg in there. You know, it's an embryo. It's just not in people's face as much. So there is an emotional aspect to seeing it and being forced to be aware of it. But the reality is your October, November, December cow elk, they're bred
already bred. Yep.
It's just a different size.
Yep. And that gets to the other thing dealing with that I thought was interesting, that they decided to get rid of that later season, but still keep the early season. And not a judgment about it necessarily, because I'm sure there's pros and cons of that, but just an observation that it seems to me up there, as somebody that's on the ground, spends a lot of time up there, that the rut, the breeding season for elk, is being pushed later and later. And that has everything to do with the cows being in heat. And one of the reasons I would guess that went into that, pushing in that direction, is that, you know, you've got people hunting cow elk during the rut, during breeding season, and they're shooting cows out of herds where there's breeding bulls bugling, and cows in heat. And what that does is, of course, breaks everybody up. All the bulls fight over all the cows that are, you know, distributed out randomly. And while they're doing that, a cow, you know, might get missed here or there from getting bred, and then she doesn't go into cycle again until a little bit later. And then that scent is in the air, and you'll get big herd bulls staying with that herd later and later, because randomly every once in a while a cow will go into heat. And I could be totally wrong with this, but it does seem to me that the breeding season is a little bit later and later, like knocking on the door of first chestnut and bull season.
Okay. And, you know, since we're talking to an audience that's all over the world.
Yep.
First chestnut bull season,
it's going to be late October, somewhere around the 25th to 28th.
Yeah.
You know, I cow hunted this year, and I believe I shot my cow somewhere around the 15th or 16th, maybe.
Get a little bit
sorry
closer.
about that. Yep, 15th or 16th. And maybe a little bit earlier than that. And there were still herds where bulls bugling and fighting at that time.
Yeah, I've observed that here for, I guess, my whole life, where that first rifle season, end of October, beginning of November, I'm still hearing a bull bugle in the morning right before it gets light, and seeing them crane their neck out and chase a cow a little bit. My understanding of the estrus is that it's about 22 days between cycles.
Okay.
Somewhere in there, 17, 22 days. Yeah.
So if something gets disrupted right around between the 7th and 14th of September, then that pushes it back until mid-October.
Right.
Yep.
A lot of folks will say that the peak breeding period for actual breeding is going to be right around the solstice, so that 21st, 22nd time frame. And then, you know, you bump out another 17, 22 days, and you're going to be in there. I've seen cows get bred in August.
Okay. Wow.
I've seen cows get bred in November. One of the ecologically fascinating things about elk is that they try to consolidate breeding to as short a time period as possible for predation. So gestation remains the same for all these animals. So if we can have most of the cows get bred within a couple days, then that means they're going to have most of their calves within a couple days. And when the calves are really young, they're very vulnerable. They're vulnerable to coyotes, wolves, bobcats, cougars, everything, bears, especially bears probably. after a few weeks, those calves can really get away. They can stay with the herd. They're much less vulnerable. So having a synchronized breeding and birthing time helps with survivability. If you spread that out, and each cow was coming into heat during different time periods, then they'd be having their calves during different time periods, and those bears that really specialize on calves could just go around and knock out newborns like crazy, and it would be bad for the animals. I think photo period has a huge sway over when these animals come into heat, more so than weather or anything like that. But are you seeing calves get born later? Are you seeing more second estrus calves that look really small compared to what they should in the fall?
So the past couple of years, I've been seeing more and more calves on the wrong side of fences being separated from herds.
Right.
And that is a real indicator. And that's, of course, during hunting season and late into the fall and in January.
Yeah.
I'm usually not up there during birthing season as regularly as I am up there during hunting season. And so that indicator would mean, yes, there are smaller and smaller calves getting born later, just being caught on the wrong side of the fences, not tall enough to jump the fence, not smart enough to figure out how to get through the fence.
Yeah. Very vulnerable
panicked.
time.
Yeah, very vulnerable.
How would you describe the terrain that you guide in?
So I guide on the Zumwalt Prairie, and it is rolling bunchgrass prairie. And when you see pictures of it, it in many ways seems like the prairies of the upper Midwest that roll on. And what you're actually not seeing is when that prairie ends, it drops several thousand feet very, very quickly down towards the Imnaha River and kind of Hell's Canyon complex area. And depending on the year, of course, but predominantly I find the deer and elk that I guide, they're in those canyons or right on the edge. They'll spend most of the heat of the day right over the edge in the shade and then come up in the evenings, feed all night on top on that bunchgrass, and then drop down again in the mornings to escape the heat of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, the highest point on the prairie is like 5,500 feet, right around there. And then it drops over into the canyon lands, and the town of Imnaha is right around 2,000 feet. And so you can get an idea of the elevation difference on that. Yeah.
And there are easily places where you could kick a rock with your foot and have it go 2,000 vertical feet.
Correct. Or yourself if you trip and
For sure
roll,
yourself.
Or, a vehicle if it gets, close to the edge in the wrong spot. So
Which has definitely happened.
It has happened on the, the Snake River unit.
I carry micro spikes out there a lot.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's an underrated piece of gear. Do you ever carry those things?
I don't. I used them recently.
We need to talk about your footwear. This is,
and I will defend my footwear.
I'm not attacking, but this is such a signature move. So, folks, I don't know if you're quite grasping how steep this country is. If you're not, please go to Zumwalt Guiding's Instagram so that you can see pictures of it. These are cliffs on cliffs on cliffs for thousands and thousands of feet that then transition into this like Oregon Trail rolling prairie that could as easily be in Kansas or Nebraska. And Tyler wears extra toughs.
I do. I wear rubber boots.
Yes.
Even in the heat of the summer in September during bow season, I usually wear extra toughs. The non-insulated, of course.
Yeah.
And my feet get extremely hot, but there is some pluses to wearing them, of course.
Let's talk about it.
There's so the benefits are they're extremely quiet.
Yes.
They're very quiet. Invasive grass does not stick to them like it does to other footwear.
Stuff that's textile.
Yeah. So you're not spreading seeds around, and some of the landowners that I work with, they would obviously prefer not to spend extra money on spraying invasive plants.
Yeah.
And so that helps along with that. I find them to be incredibly comfortable. They don't have a lot of ankle support, but I've worn them for so long that I have incredibly strong ankles.
Yeah.
I have done physical therapy before, and I've had them comment on the strength of my ankles. So when I eventually do break them, it's going to be a problem. But up until then, it has made my ankles incredibly strong. The grip, I can grip on just about any rocks, wet rocks, and just about any angle, and it keeps me from slipping as much on the relatively, sometimes loose hillsides, sometimes wet, depending on if it's got some rain on top of that bunch grass.
Yeah.
And you never really know when you're going to have to wade a stream or go through a bog. From most pictures and most people's idea of Hell's Canyon, it's incredibly dry and, hot, and there's rattlesnakes, and, it's a desert. Well, it's not a desert. There's an amazing amount of water from the Chestnut Aquifer, and in the bottoms of those canyons, there are literal swamps and alder thickets that you do find deer and elk in regularly, obviously. And I'll walk, I'll forget that everybody behind me is wearing regular boots, and I'll, just keep walking through the mud that's, just shy of going over top of them.
I'm increasingly nerdy about hunting footwear.
Uh-huh.
And I also believe that a lot of what people are using for hunting footwear, hunting boots, the way they think about hunting boots, isn't the correct tool for what they're doing. So the classic, like leather, 8-inch, 9-inch upper, Gore-Tex lined, like the very similar boot that so many companies make, like
big
that
hard flat sole.
Yeah, big Vibram sole. Little bit of rise in the heel, lace to toe. Like every company out there is making this boot, and that is the most common boot that you're going to see Western hunters wear.
Yep.
I don't think it's the right tool most of the time. There are times that I wear that style of boot. There absolutely are. But for the most part, I'm going to wear something that's very soft, and I wear ankle-high extra toughs quite a bit, and they're very, very tough. Where I guide, I don't have to deal with the bogginess. So I'm not really worried about those wading situations. But man, they're so deadly quiet. I wore barefoot boots all of last year, and I was trying to get ready for hunting in Australia, where I knew that I was going to be sure enough barefoot for a part of it. And I have a hard time going away from it now because my feet got a lot stronger. My ankles got a lot stronger. All those little muscles in my lower legs developed again like they should. And I just became so much more nimble and agile, and I got addicted to the light weight of them. And now, unless the situation absolutely demands that really aggressive tread, then I'm not going to do it. Something that I would like to see is like a modular shoe, so that I could wear my barefoot shoes that I'm wearing right now, which just have a really thin cork insole that's incredibly flexible. I could ball these shoes up and like stuff them in a jar. But I would like to see something modular so that I could stiffen that insole up for when I'm packing weight out. But yeah, extra toughs are slept on.
I enjoy wearing them. People should at least try them. You don't have to carry them with you.
Whitetail guys get it.
Yeah, no, they're around here and in the East.
Yeah, all over the country.
Oh, interesting.
Because
awesome.
they're not breathable, right? So you're leaving less scent from your feet on the trail on the way into your stand.
That's a added benefit that I had not thought about.
Yeah. So that scent control element is really important for moving into a static hunting location, into an ambush position.
Good point. Yeah, and just leave them outside so you don't get any scent on them from going in the house, and you should be good to go.
Yeah. I'm sure they're leaving some scent, but it's not
the same type.
It's not the same as a breathable boot where you're going to be getting those scent molecules coming off of your feet and, leaving that breadcrumb trail everywhere you go.
Yeah, it's certainly keeping all the scent in.
Yeah, that is a little bit of a downside to not breathable.
Yeah, but I've gotten used to it.
there.
Yeah. You dry them out every night.
So hunting elk in this short grass prairie is a real challenge. I've done a good bit of it throughout my life. I've hunted in places where terrain is the biggest factor as far as like steepness, and a lot of it is just about your ability to navigate through really steep country to get into a position. I've hunted a lot in flat timber and rolling timber country where the topography is similar to the top of Zumwalt, but it's at a higher elevation, so it's pines and mixed moist conifer. And then I've hunted on this prairie terrain. It's easily my weakest point, is hunting the wide open short grass prairie. How do you do it, and how do you get close to animals when you don't necessarily have trees around?
Yeah, in many respects, when I am able to find a bull in the steep canyon, that is preferable because you've got terrain.
Yeah.
You can usually reliably get several hundred yards away by just spotting him, walking around, dropping down a ridge, staying hidden, popping up at a right spot, and getting set up, waiting for him to stand up, and going from there. It rarely works out that smoothly, but ideally it would. When they're up on top, and I don't remember exactly if it was last year or the year before, but we had some rains in September, and we had a heavy amount of rain in September, and it greened up the prairie to the point where there were big herds on top, all during both bull seasons.
What's a big herd?
So,
because it's different from what most people might think is a big herd.
Yeah, in my opinion, a big herd is anything over 75. Yeah. And sometimes that can get into the 100, 200 sometimes, depending on lots of different factors, like how much pressure has been other places, right. Human pressure, how much predator pressure has been going on.
Yeah.
Like if the wolves are in the area, I can't 100%, attribute it to wolf pressure, but there is something to be said for being in a large group, that there's less likely that they're going to pick you out individually. And so that year, I think the biggest factor was probably the feed.
Yeah.
They were up on top, and they were spending all day up on top and in this rolling open prairie. And thankfully, the wind does one of two things up there. Most times it comes directly out of the south.
Yeah.
Unless there's a storm, then it turns around and comes out of the northwest.
Yeah.
And so you wake up in the morning, and I don't have cell reception up there. I can't look at the internet necessarily until I get up to a certain point, but you can tell if it looks like it's raining or the wind's been blowing hard in a storm sense, it's coming out of the northwest. And so you can make a plan based on that. And it looks flat from a distance. It is anything but flat.
Sure.
Yeah, there is more than enough cover to hide yourself. But you get a herd of 100 or over animals, and that is a lot of eyes.
Yep.
And there's always a cow that is way too curious for her own good, and she's snooping around the outside. But as an example, on one of the hunts I did a few years ago, I had a gentleman from Pennsylvania who never really shot anything more than 100 yards away. And I had him find a range where he could shoot at 300. And he'd practice and practice and practice with his 30-06. He got a scope with turrets on it. And I was like, this is great. I did what I do on every hunt. I take him to the range, and I said, basically, show me what you got.
I oftentimes see you out there on the same day.
Yep. It's usually the day before hunting season or right in there. But we go up there, and I say, I'm not going to let you shoot farther than you can shoot here at the range when we're hunting. So let me see what you got. And he did amazingly well, and we even did it shot to the point where he was going past his comfort level. I mean, there's zero consequences for hitting steel. So we were shooting at 400 and 500 yards, and he was, impressed. And the amount of confidence that gives somebody, you can really see. And the amount of confidence that comes from me seeing my hunter do that is basically priceless.
And are you having them shoot off the bench? Or
I have them shoot off the bench. Mm-hmm. I have them shoot prone occasionally if we have time to do that. I have them practice prone at home because the amount of practice that's going to happen, in an hour or so at the range is minimal.
Yeah.
But I do want to make sure the rifle's hitting good and that they are comfortable, at this elevation. A lot of things can change between here and, the East Coast.
Yeah.
So he was like a lot of people that come from places that aren't here or aren't in the Intermountain West where distances are deceptive. People that come from the west side of Oregon that are used to hunting timber and people from farther east from the East Coast, they come out here and, from where we're at, I can see 40 miles away from the studio. I can see the Seven Devil Mountains. We can see a long ways and distance is deceptive out there. And so this year, the herds were up top still, and I saw bull's antlers sticking up over the rise from maybe, a mile away.
Right.
And I was like, that's a bull that we want to take a look at. And funny enough, I could only see his antlers. The closer we got and the more we used terrain to get closer, more and more heads started popping up to the point where there were probably easily over 100 elk spread out over probably a good 20 acres. And thankfully the wind was good. Wind wasn't too variable, and he was a nice fit guy that wasn't afraid of crawling. And that's what you got to do to get within range. Terrain only lasts so long until you start crawling. And I have guys practice off bipods, especially if you're not used to a bipod. And we crawled within 315 yards of that bull.
Nice.
And, a lot of people are going to hear 315 yards and say, that's a long ways. On the prairie, that is not very far. That is point blank range. That is as close as we were going to get when we ran out of cover.
It's the sweet spot, honestly.
Yep.
You can still get away with being able to talk to somebody who's just right next to you. You can get away with minor movements like loading, adjusting scopes to an extent. But yeah, and then you also don't have a super significant holdover at 300 yards.
No. And, I had seen him shoot at that. Yeah. And that bull was at 315 yards. The closest cow was somewhere around 35 yards away.
Oh.
That was the problem.
That's big drama.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah. And that was closer than I wanted to be.
You're getting away with nothing at 35 yards.
No, that's why I say that. So, and she's facing away from us, and the wind's steady in our faces. And I set up everything, and I say, aim on him. He's laying down. I want him to stand up. And we're sitting there, and we're sitting there, and we're sitting there, and it took, a good 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Lots of things can happen in 2.5 hours before he stood up, including that cow turning around and feeding towards us.
Yeah.
She was probably 15 yards away.
Wow.
At one point, she looked at us and then, kind of looked around to all the other elk. None of the other elk were scared, so she didn't need to be scared.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lead cow. So it was just a subordinate cow that took orders from other elk, and she didn't feel confident enough in anything, so she turned back around and went and laid down again. And camo, at that distance comes into play. Yeah. And, of course.
Yeah.
Yep. And I was wearing, you probably know the acronym for it, but it's like general issue desert camo, not chocolate chip, the other one, like the cold weather gear.
Okay. Like MARPAT?
No.
The Marine Corps pattern?
No, the one before that.
Oh, like the Desert Storm camo.
Yeah. Yep. Not chocolate chip, but the other one.
Yep.
And then the name eludes me right now, but
I can't remember that one either. It was before my time.
Yep.
But it is a good. Well, it's a good like dead grass camouflage pattern.
It matches that dead bunch grass. It's about the color of really well used Carhartts. And that's another thing I tend to wear a lot of, insulated and non-insulated versions of those Carhartts. They match perfect.
So we got to talk about that for a second.
Yep.
In Vietnam, they used colorblind spotters to identify sniper positions.
Okay. Yep.
And I have found over and over again that colorblind hunters are game spotting machines.
Movement, right?
Movement and shape.
Okay. Yep.
Right? I think that the ability to see colors in the full spectrum that most people can is oftentimes a hindrance because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a color. Whereas folks who are colorblind, they're just game spotting animals. I've spent a lot of time talking to colorblind hunters about what they can't see because their color spectrum of what they see is closer to that of an elk. And what I hear from them over and over again is that one of the hardest things for them to spot is worn out Carhartts.
Interesting. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that it's variegated color and texture and the things that bleaching from sun and wear do to color. It brings out something that's very natural and blends really well. So yeah, I think worn out Carhartts are absolutely deadly.
I like high-end camo, especially the materials they're made out of. But for my little tiny area of the world, that desert camo jacket and those worn out Carhartts are really perfect.
I just talked about this at the elk seminar that I taught in Hunt Expo. There are no green mammals.
No.
Not a one of them.
No, there isn't.
If green was an effective color for camouflage, nature would be using it with mammals a lot.
Oh, yeah. Everything would be the color of a frog, right?
Right. Yeah. But for mammals, there's not. Nope. So start looking at the colors of predators and then really get into it. And one of the things that I find the most fascinating about this with what I call camouflage theory is if I were to pluck a hair off of a coyote and really look at that single hair, there's 8 identifiable colors in that one hair. And then there's millions of hairs on the animal. And I think that is where the magic is
depth.
That depth, having so many different colors that just the gradient of gray to tan to black to white, and then overlapping that over and over again. There's something that's really magical about that. So I look at the color of coyotes. I look at the color of things that are very difficult to spot in nature, like bobcats, cougars.
Yeah, the cougar is what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
He looks like he's made out of Carhartt.
He looks like he's made out of worn out Carhartts. And if a lion isn't moving, boy, are they tough to see.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in a recent podcast, you mentioned that you knew somebody that had lived here their whole life and never seen one at some point.
Papa Doug?
Yeah. And, for the amount of time I spend behind glass and out there looking, 10 hours at a time behind glass, just constantly.
Yeah, maybe 80, 100 days a year?
Yeah, a lot. And I have seen one cougar. I've seen a lot of stuff out of the corner of my eye. I've seen, shadows flitting through the woods, but an actual confirmed full-bodied cougar was once.
Yeah.
And it was sitting on the back of a dead bull elk.
Yeah.
And that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw that bull, that real distinctive color down in a canyon, got out my spotting scope, and there was something slightly different colored sitting on its back. And I said, oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, quick story.
Yep, go ahead.
Earlier this week, Buddy sent me a video of this deer that he walked up on the edge of a different canyon down here. This deer was still alive when he got there.
Really?
Had just been attacked, so had bite marks in its throat, had a tear in its rib cage, and whatever had killed it had started to eat its hindquarter a little bit. But the animal is still alive, so whatever killed it was right there. Everything about this screamed cougar to me, right? So he sends me this video, and I was like, what an opportunity. I said, are you going to go back and hunt that lion? He said, tomorrow's Monday. I can't do it till next weekend, but I'm definitely going back. I said, I hate to ask, but will you send me a pen? I'll go there tomorrow. And he's like, can I go with you? I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we made this big plan, and it was a tough climb for me. Climbing the canyon wall took about an hour and a half. February is not peak physical fitness season for Mr. Nash.
Yeah, we've got the off-season hunting guy condition going on.
Anyways, we're huffing and puffing, and just before the crest of the canyon, Andrew looks up and he, starts throwing the hand signals to me that he's seen something, and I look up the hill, and it looks like there's just 2 coyotes up there. And I said, shoot them. And then, I'm out of breath, of course, and I pull up my binoculars and look, and it's 2 bobcats. So cool. This is just not something that I've never seen 2 bobcats together in the wild like that before, but they were skyline, so couldn't be easier to see them.
About the same size animals?
About the same size, both adult animals. Yep. I got to watch them for close to 15 minutes. But as soon as they came off of the skyline and got down into the rocks, anytime that they were stopped, it was everything I could do to pick up a bobcat that I knew was there with really good stabilized binoculars. And then they'd move and I'd be like, okay, I got him. I see him. And then they'd just kind of blend across the hillside for a second and stop again and just poof, fully visible. But that color palette is incredibly effective. I don't know why more camouflage companies don't try to mimic these models that have evolved over however many hundreds of thousands of years to be the peak of effectiveness right now.
Yeah, evolution is a pretty great tool for developing camo pattern.
Yeah. Just a cool experience. Okay.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But to finish up the story, we got
people are going to want to hear the actual end of the story. Yeah.
So we get up on top, we start to make the approach to this kill site. We're working into the wind. I bump a cow elk 400 yards out. Okay. Odd that she's here if a cougar's right here. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Get within a couple hundred yards of the kill site. Can't see the animal. And then bump a couple whitetail deer that are right there. And I said, okay. The plan was going to be, we're going to post up and watch this area from 200 or 300 yards away until close to dark and then do a calling session, if nothing else. But at this point, I'm like, there's not a cougar right here. For sure not. Not with all these animals right next to it. Let's go see it. If it dragged it off, if it cached it someplace, maybe it'll be in a snowy spot. I can pick up some tracks. We can go walk it out, whatever. Get there. Nothing has touched this deer. Nothing came back.
Really?
And part of me wonders if it wasn't one of those bobbers.
Yeah, it would be curious to see. I mean, I'm sure you looked at those bite marks and if there was any indication that it was those bobcats.
Yeah.
I've heard of them taking deer before. And I've seen videos.
It was a fawn. It was...
Yeah, no problem for a cat like that.
If bobcats were bigger, they'd rule the world. They used to be saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah, if a cougar can kill a full-grown bull, 600-700-pound bull elk by breaking its neck, like a 110-pound cat, maybe a smaller cat can do that, then a bobcat can kill just about anything.
Yeah, a 28-pound bobcat can grab a 60-pound fawn. Oh, dude, yeah. I used to ask people what the toughest animal they felt like they could beat in a fight was.
Oh, man.
And I'd hear people say bobcats. I'm like, dude, not even close. My house cat would jack me up if it wanted to. It couldn't hold on to
Raccoons are pretty nasty.
Yeah, for sure. If a raccoon really bites into you, I'm probably backing out.
I've seen grown men run for their lives from badgers before.
Yeah.
Badgers are terrifying.
Yeah, I see some of these knucklehead fence builders in Wyoming grabbing badgers in the springtime. I'm like, you're going to get lockjawed right into your tender parts, and it's going to be a lot funnier video for the rest of us. But anyways, that's that on, predator colors. Tigers, dude, that's another one, right? There's a color that really stands out to us.
Yeah, it's a distinctive pattern for sure.
But not to the deer. They evolved to hunt things like axis deer, which are super clicked on and have fantastic vision, but that color palette works.
Yep, in that dappled undergrowth.
Yeah. And the way shadows fall in the jungle, being longitudinal like that a lot of times.
Exactly.
Whereas you get into places that have a different type of shadow, then you start to see animals like jaguars and leopards, develop their color patterns.
Yep,
I don't know.
those spots.
It's interesting.
That is super interesting. Yeah, the reason that maybe more camo companies don't is, people.
Yeah.
People they're afraid people are going to get hurt wearing the same color as a deer or an elk, of course. And I go even a step further. I'm guiding on private land, and I, even during rifle season, carry a bow hunting decoy on my back. And I feel sorry sometimes for my hunters because they are following this cow elk staring at them the whole time. And I would never do that on public land,
right?
Obviously. But since we're the only people there, it pays dividends, especially to get back to how you hunt on that open prairie. I use decoys sometimes, even during rifle season.
Yeah.
And if I have my hunter stand behind me and I have that decoy on my backpack that I put in front of me, I can walk straight towards a herd for a long ways. Within a few hundred yards is when things start to become a problem because elk have excellent vision most of the time and they know something's off. They know something's weird.
Yeah.
But it will get you through open spots. It'll get you from point A to point B on cover. That's one of the tricks I use to hunt that open prairie. You got to use everything you can to do that.
Well, I left you at 315 yards, 2 hours into to a bedded bull.
Yep. Then that of course, was all of the super exciting parts right up until the trigger gets pulled. And my hunter did an amazing job.
Yeah.
That bull finally stood up. I hit record on my camera and I said, "Go ahead when you're ready." And he pulled the trigger and it, slipped right in the right spot. And hit that one lung really well. It was a little bit far back to hit both lungs at that angle it was at. But, of course, you want a really good hit when you're shooting into that many elk. There was no other elk around him.
Yep.
Like it was a clean shot. But when you shoot into that many elk, first thing that happens is they get closer together and they start moving. And, that really good hit paid dividends because the rest of the herd, outpaced him and he was able to get a running shot on him that hit perfect also at like 360, 370 at that point, and then he fell down. Anytime you're shooting around there, especially up on top, you're looking at how close the edge of that canyon is.
Yep.
And that calculation is constantly going through my head because as soon as that bull steps over the edge of that canyon, he can go a long, long ways. Wounded elk like to go downhill, and there's no end to the downhill when it comes to that canyon, it seems like.
Yeah.
Anyways, but the bull fell right there up on top, and it worked out just perfect.
Gotta love that.
Yep. Yeah. First time out west, this guy came out here.
Wow.
It was great. It was pretty cool.
Very cool.
But yeah, that's some of the techniques I use to hunt that bunchgrass prairie.
Tell me about your interest in older guns.
So, my grandfather was kind of a perpetual tinkerer with things and liked anything mechanical. Watches, pocket watches especially, old engines, antique cars, as in 1912 antique cars, the beginning of the beginnings, anything that was really simple and mechanical. And there's, nothing more simple and mechanical than a firearm. They're designed to do one thing, to send a projectile downrange. But within that, there's hundreds of different variations on how to do that, if not more, right? There's lots of different little nuances to how that happens. And how rifles work, how triggers work, how the whole system work is like clockwork in a lot of instances. And I grew up around my grandfather who was a gunsmith, and I spent a lot of time in his shop, on his workbench that was piled up with odds and ends of levers from really obscure rifles, actions of Winchester high walls, 1885 high walls, and other rifles like that. And his absolute favorite form of firearm was the single shot rifle.
Yeah.
And right in that transition between black powder, muzzleloader, and bolt action rifle. Not that he didn't have a few bolt actions and a few modern rifles. Like he had a Mini 14 that I don't think he ever shot. It sat there. Well, if I ever need it, it's there, he says. But he also had, this kind of quite a few different single shot rifles. He had a Ruger number 1 in 458 that his father had purchased, a perfect elk rifle, he thought it would be. And I don't know if any elk ever got shot with it, but it sat there and it looked really cool. 458 tropical model.
Yep.
And that number 1 really captured my imagination. So much so that the first rifle I ever bought with one of my first checks from the mill that I worked at the time was I went into a little used gun store, and there was a Ruger number 1 and 375 H&H sitting on the wall, and I had to have that, and in retrospect, I should have bought a dozen of them for $450, the price tag that right. was, because they're exceptionally expensive now comparatively, but that 375 H&H, that was amazing. Way too much gun for an 18-year-old kid, but I learned a lot. I learned how to not flinch. I learned all about reloading, because there's no way an 18-year-old kid can afford to shoot that rifle a lot, at $70 a box or whatever they were. And, from my grandfather, I, really was interested in old single-shot rifles. And in fact, the one I used this previous year to shoot the cow that I got was a Browning 1885 in 7 mag. And it is one of the prettiest rifles, almost too pretty to crawl out through the bunch grass. You would have laughed if you had seen how I was crawling towards that herd. Everything was on the ground except the rifle. It was hovering over the grass as I was trying to not scratch it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's something to be said for, having a rifle and you're not afraid to scratch, but I can't get away from having a beautiful rifle.
I'm torn with the way guns are today, because I love that firearm manufacturers have started to make rifles that are ergonomic, that are adjustable, but God, they're ugly. And they don't feel good. They're made out of materials that aren't necessarily pleasant to the touch, and they're harsh in cold or hot environments. They're wonderfully functional, but we've gone away from the beautiful rifles and shotguns that I aspired to own when I was a kid. The first rifle that I ever bought new was a Ruger number 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
It was a 22-250. It had a laminated stock, a stainless steel bull barrel. It was terrifically accurate. I made some of the best shots that I'll ever make in my life with that gun, and I loved it. I sold that rifle right before I went into the Marine Corps, because what a lot of folks don't know is that Marines have to, or at least officers have to buy all of their uniforms. So just my dress blues cost $2,700, right? Yep. So fresh out of college, going into the Marines, I've got to buy, all the workout gear and basic uniforms to go through officer candidate school, and then at the end of it, I have to buy these dress blues and the officer sword, and I had to sell my favorite rifle to be able to do it. And I could go buy a Ruger number 1 now. I could afford to go buy a Ruger number 1 now. But for some reason, it almost feels like cheating on that rifle, that first love of mine.
Any chance you could buy that back from whoever got it, or could you track it down?
I think it's gone. Oof, yeah. I think it's gone. And that's not the one that I would get. The first Ruger number 1 that I saw was the 6mm Remington, and it had a nice piece of wood on it. And that's what made me fall in love with it. And then when I, visually it was a beautiful gun. And then when I saw that falling block action, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And, if you practice with a Ruger number 1 very much, you get to reload that gun really fast.
Just about as fast as a bolt gun.
Just about as fast as a
Pretty
bolt
quick.
gun.
Yep.
And there is something that we've lost in hunting, and I think that, well, we haven't lost it yet, but we're close to losing and that is the artwork and the aesthetics of a beautiful rifle. And I'm seeing some of it start to come back, and I can't encourage that enough.
Yep.
Because we got a little bit too concerned with shooting a sub-MOA group at 100 yards. And we got a little bit too concerned about having a rifle that we didn't have to clean when we got back. And when those concerns consolidated, we ended up with materials in the stock and in the barrel and in the rest of the gun that were impervious to weather, which was great for some people. But then the whole industry went that way. And then as we started to get into chassis and adjustability and modularity, folding stocks, things like that, suddenly our guns got ugly. And we've bought into that. I think we can get it back. I think there's a way to make a precision rifle beautiful. And I'm seeing a few pictures starting to float around of these hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious where that goes.
Like a chassis rifle with a wood stock.
Yeah. Well, they've still got good adjustability in the comb. There's ergonomics that are built into it.
I think Boyd's sells one that is similar to that. It's a replacement custom style stock that I can't remember the exact name. I don't want to say what I think it might be.
Yeah,
but
it's all right.
They have one like that.
Yeah. But I want to see guns get beautiful again.
Yeah, there is something about a pretty rifle. And what I actually recommend people do, I have a Browning Auto 5 that fits this mold, is I found one used that somebody had beat up.
Oh.
A really nice rifle, or a really nice shotgun in this case, that somebody had scratched, and it was well-loved.
Yeah.
And I bought it. It still has the Water Buffalo butt plate on it.
Cool.
Out of the horn of a water buffalo, and so it must be right around 1950, somewhere around there. I could be wrong with that, and it's a 12, and somebody else has already damaged it. It still looks beautiful. It's got a lot of character to it. So if you can find a used rifle that is a really nice rifle. Another example is sporterized rifles. Those have come up in value recently, but what I used to do is I used to specialize in finding people that had butchered rifles.
Yep.
When I worked at the gun counter at the hardware store and looking on Gunbroker, I would find people that had taken, an old Mauser and butchered it, or any one of those old military rifles, and you could get them for relatively cheap back then. And it's basically a gunsmithing project.
Yeah.
A lot of those projects I never completed, or I halfway completed, or I worked on them, but quite the challenge to try and turn something that somebody already had ruined into a beautiful rifle.
Yeah.
And I got pretty close, and in a lot of instances, I made a lot of mistakes, of course. But
were you learning how to checker and stuff like that?
I have never gotten that far. I have quite a few books, and I have never quite had the patience to do it. I have chased checkering before to clean it up a little bit.
Right.
And there was a period of time, and I think that probably still exists, with machine checkering and pressed checkering that happened. And you can learn a lot from chasing that and turning it into real checkering.
Yeah.
There are people that do amazing jobs, and that's certainly a dying art too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you are looking for a rifle that somebody else has already ruined that you're not going to ruin, do not take a vintage military rifle and sporterize it yourself. The 1950s, 60s, and 70s is full of amateur gunsmiths who have already done that for you. And you might have to pull a barrel off and replace a barrel, but that's fine. It's a project.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to do that and you really want a sporterized Mauser, get a Ruger 77. A Ruger M77 is basically just a custom Mauser.
Yep.
And for the amount of money that you're going to spend on customizing a old Mauser, you might as well just get that Ruger M77.
Yeah.
You go a long ways with that. And,
sure.
you can get get one with a Hauk stock and then swap out a wood stock. Put that on there and just make it your own and try and make it beautiful, as you're saying.
And it doesn't take a lot of tools to do it either.
No.
Which is nice because a lot of projects are pretty prohibitive in just the expense in tools that you've got to get. This isn't necessarily that case.
Yeah, you don't need a lathe to put a new stock.
Tell me about this bulletin you brought down here.
Well, in my grandfather's stuff, I inherited a lot of his magazines and books. Sorry about that. I had to move around a little bit. But this is the May-June 1964 Oregon State Game Commission Bulletin. And I was going to give it to you because being a numbers guy and having heard some of the podcasts you've done where you talk about mule deer numbers, I thought this had some fascinating information and a little bit of kind of a snapshot of what mule deer numbers were like in 1963, and especially in this county.
Yeah.
And I kind of added up all of the deer that were shot in the, 6 units that are in this county, roughly.
Yeah.
And in 1963, bucks and does together, 7,700 deer got shot.
Wow.
In that season. Bucks only was 5,800. And you can juxtapose that with, so that 5,800 number, in 2022, I looked on online, ODF&W, 872 bucks in the same area got shot.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got 7,700 deer at all.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. And that's what the harvest was in 1963.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah. It's a cool little snapshot here. And there's elk numbers too, but compared to mule deer, elk are doing all right.
Yeah.
Mule deer numbers continuously go down.
Yeah.
And I have, some anecdotal evidence about why I think that is. And it was, so when I first moved here, 2008, to the county, in the same place that I live now, not too far from here on the slope, there was regularly about 15 mule deer does that lived in the backyard. And they were constantly there. You could tell just based on the aspens in the little brush patch next to my house that there was heavy deer presence. There was, aspens that, you could barely reach around, giant, huge aspens. And then there were nothing between that and aspens that were the size of my pinky.
Yeah, they're just getting browsed annually.
Yep. They love aspens. It's a great winter feed for them and late spring feed, right? Along with alders and willows and everything else that goes in there. But fast forward to 2012 or so, every year around mid-November during the rut, they'd bring in a big 4-point mule deer buck, and he'd hang out in the backyard. I'd try to keep my distance. It was cool to see him that close, but doing typical backyard mule deer stuff,
right?
Like town deer type things.
Yeah.
And eating out of bird feeder type stuff.
Yeah.
And
they're all rutted up.
Yeah. Just
spring
silly.
break.
Just silly. And around 2012, I noticed some whitetails being in the fields next to my house. And up until then, I don't know if I hadn't paid attention, but it was mostly just mule deer.
Yeah.
And a couple 100 yards from my house, this big mule deer buck was hanging out with his 10 or so, 15 does and walking around waiting for him so he could breed them. And pretty soon this little 3x3 whitetail buck shows up and, half the size of that mule deer and starts pushing the mule deer around, pushing that buck around a little bit. And, obviously the mule deer pushed him away, and that whitetail buck would not take no for an answer. It was if they spoke a different language. They had different rules about fighting. Mule deer, for lack of a better term, for an analogy, would be like a gentleman style match fist fight or something where, we're going to put on gloves and you've bested me, sir. And, the loser goes away and they push each other around a little bit. And that whitetail was scrappy. He was a bar fighter. He was a prison yard fighter. He would fight and fight and fight and fight. And he kept fighting with that mule deer buck until that mule deer buck gave up and took off. then that little scrappy whitetail was standing there with, 10 to 15 mule deer does. And ever since then, mule deer numbers have gone down visually that I can see from my place, and to the point now where I haven't seen a mule deer for years. It's been 8 years probably since I've seen a mule deer close to my house right there.
Yeah.
There's one that my suspicion is she's a hybrid, just her behavior.
Yeah.
She acts like a mule deer. She has kind of a funny looking tail. She hangs out in the backyard where none of the other whitetail will get within 300 yards of my house. That hybrid has 2 fawns every year, and they're kind of docile like she is.
Yeah.
And that's it as far as, links to mule deer go.
And now whitetail are in the canyons, getting up into the alpine.
Yep. I regularly see them up on the prairie now too.
Yep.
There was always kind of a group out towards Buckhorn a little bit that I would regularly see, but now they occasionally pop up, especially during the rut. There's another buck that I have suspicions of being a hybrid.
Yeah, you
just the way he
great video
behaves.
of him.
Yeah, just the way he behaves. He hangs out with mule deer almost exclusively. I would love to be in a position where I had a hunter that would be interested in taking him if we had the opportunity.
Yeah.
But
get that DNA.
Yeah, I would love to see that. But, he's not quite old enough, in my opinion, to be a whitetail with split antlers like that mule deer. He's not gnarled enough. He's got that split. He behaves weird.
He looks weird too.
Yeah, he just looks weird. And he behaves a lot like a mule deer.
Yeah.
But I'll never know until I get DNA.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they continuously pop up in places I don't expect them. That big white flag.
Talk to me about Alaska.
I've always, in the back of my mind, wanted to be a hunting guide from a very young age. I spent a lot of time in used bookstores as a kid, and I came across this book in the sports section was where the hunting books were, and it said Death in the Long Grass by Peter Capstick.
Yeah.
And it had a pretty intriguing picture on the front cover, and that name is pretty intriguing, that title for that book. And he had a sense of humor that I really appreciated, kind of a British sense of humor that I'm sure he acquired in Africa. And I read that book, and then I read it again, and then I read it again. I was right about the time my mom was kind of asking me every once in a while, what do you think you want to do? And much to her horror, I'm sure, I said, I want to be a hunting guide. I want to be a big game guide. And I was like, definitely want to be, do something with dangerous animals. But I didn't say that to my mom,
right.
My poor mother. And, that kind of went away because normal kids don't go to their guidance counselors at school and say, I want to be a big game hunting guide. It kind of just didn't occur to me to do that.
Right.
And it disappeared from the back of my head, from the front of my mind. It kind of percolated in the back there. And I graduated from college, fast forward obviously quite a ways, graduated from college, graphic design, and wasn't doing a whole lot. My dad calls me up. He says, hey, what are you doing? And, you never want to tell your dad you're not doing anything. I had a few things going on. I was making money, but nothing that I was really interested in. He's like, I got a buddy that lives in Alaska, and he needs 2 vehicles driven up and put on the ferry. You doing anything in the next month? You want to go? And that's not something you say no to.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like a few things in my life, I just kind of went blindly into it. And I'm like, sure, this is an adventure. Let's do it. And got these two Suzuki Samurais, rattled up to Bellingham, got on the ferry. It was an adventure in itself. Got up there, got to Juneau, went out to one of the ABC islands, Admiralty, Baranof, and Chichagof Islands. Went out there and hung out with this guy. This guy was a little nutty, like a lot of Alaskan personalities are. Super entertaining, but he was not boring. Definitely not a boring guy. And he said, hey, next year, you want to come up and work? And I did the thing that I do occasionally where I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's great. Without checking with anybody. I was like, yeah, guaranteed. I'll be up. And he said, you know what? You come up a little early and I have a brown bear hunt scheduled You can come along with us. Maybe you can help out. And I was like, yes, I can. I'll be there.
I already have a 375 H&H.
Yeah. I think at that point I brought a shotgun, an 870. And took it on the ferry with me. Going up. That first time I went up on the ferry from Bellingham, which is a really cool experience just to do.
How long is that trip?
It's about 3 days, if I remember correct. And if anybody ever gets a chance to do it, don't get a room, sleep on the deck.
The people's cruise.
Yeah, it's the people's cruise. Especially if you're doing it in March and April and May, it's usually people that are going up to work.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of working class people. People don't usually do that as like a pleasure cruise type of thing, although you should, because it's really cool.
Yeah.
You sleep up on the deck, you sleep underneath these heat lamps, and it's covered. You're not going to get rained on, but you get to hang out with all these people, spend 4 days, get to know people. It's really cool. But went out there, showed up early, and kind of a salmon fishing boat is what they used, and got to meet the master guide, a guy with a really cool name. His name was Fagan Kolbjorn Skaffelstad. And just the coolest guy, too. And he was part Tlingit native.
Okay.
And as you can tell, part Scandinavian also. And his son was a guide, and I was a glorified pack boy along with his other kids that were there too.
How you start out in Alaska.
That's how you start out.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was super entertaining. Yep. Got to go on a few hunts. Got to go see a few bow hunts for brown bear. It was amazing. Yeah. It was a really cool experience. I got to do stuff that a lot of people don't get to do. So they were Tlingit natives. And so as a rural Alaskan resident, you're allowed a subsistence license. But on top of that, as a Tlingit native, you can do things like seal, harbor seal, sea otter, sea lion, stuff like that.
Whale?
No, I don't believe that they can. You got to go farther north for something like that.
Okay.
Yep. This was entertaining enough.
Yeah.
And I got to witness that, which was really cool. And they would take the hides, get them tanned, make all sorts of stuff out of them. They wouldn't eat the otter. They would eat seal, harbor seal. And usually what would happen is get a few of those and skin them, tube them, and then take about half of the animal and take it to an older person's house, an older Tlingit that would really appreciate something like that. And you drop it off to them.
Yeah.
And they would cook it up however they did, or take some of the fat to them, which they would render down and make kind of cracklings or cook with, or any number of things.
Did they use ulus?
There was a few up there, and I saw them used occasionally, but not extensively. It was basically just whatever sharp knife was around. That's kind of where knives go to die.
Yeah. Salt water in the air.
Salt water in the air. I saw them used, and they used them, but they didn't use them exclusively.
I've watched some videos of people butchering seals with ulus who really know what they're doing, and they're masterful. The yield off of a seal is incredible, too.
Oh, yeah, it's impressive. Yeah.
They get a lot of meat, a lot of fat. What's left of that carcass when they're done isn't enough to interest a dog.
No,
yeah,
not really.
Really impressive.
Yeah, it's super impressive. And it tastes decent.
Yeah.
I mean, fishy pork is kind of how I would describe it a little bit.
All right.
I mean,
like
that's
fish and pork.
I have the ability to eat just about anything that's edible.
Yeah.
And in fact, I used to not be a very good cook, and so I just kind of pretended I was in a foreign country and that it was an acquired taste. Like if I happened to cook something that tasted bad, I got to eat it anyways. I'm in college. I don't have any money. I can't throw this away and cook something else. But yeah, Alaska was a really cool place. Along with that hunting, they obviously did a lot of fishing, and I got to see some gill netting go on and purse seining in real shallow water. And then I got to see them collect seagull eggs, and we collected quite a bit of seaweed also. It was a cool experience. And on top of that, to get to see those brown bear hunts, they did a lot of archery hunts, which was interesting. And The cleanest kills I ever saw on brown bear were with an archer, with a bow and arrow. Like the bear didn't know it had been hit.
Right.
Their adrenaline didn't go up. They just kind of stopped, looked at all the blood pouring out of them, walked a little bit farther and fell over. Occasionally if a bone was hit, they'd spin around in circles, biting at it or something like that. But they didn't really know where it'd come from. Whereas when you shoot one with a rifle, it instantly, becomes kind of an issue where they can get a bit aggressive.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I never had to shoot a bear in self-defense. I could have probably justified it a couple of times.
Yeah.
I chose not to.
Yeah.
And I never really saw anybody shoot a brown bear that hadn't already been hit by somebody else. The majority of my close calls came when I was either alone, like deer hunting by myself, or between the two seasons. So there's a spring and fall bear season. We did photo tours off of cruise ships. It's one of the smallest cruise ship ports in Alaska. And, this gargantuan ship with thousands of people show up in a town of 500 to 800 people.
Right.
And people everywhere. And a lot of times we had them scheduled. Other times I would sit with a little sign in front of my van with my shotgun over my shoulder and say, anybody want to go see a bear?
Yeah.
And there were enough bears, somewhere between 3 and 4 per square mile, especially during salmon season.
Yeah.
Right?
You can find them.
You can find them. I could guarantee practically that you were going to see a bear within 4 hours.
Yeah.
And, if you're in a group of people, there's a lot you can get away with around brown bears. And this just comes from experience interacting with them over and over again, day after day after day. And one of my favorite tricks was there's a extensive road system on the island I was on. And around town, there's a lot of clear cuts. And those clear cuts turn into huckleberry fields. And when the huckleberries are on, there will be quite a few bears hanging out in those huckleberry fields. And you'll have a van full of people and you'll be cruising along and you'll look over and there's a bear sitting, 100 yards off the road. And even though it's, a clear cut, if people aren't familiar with what the aftermath of a clear cut looks like, it's jumbly, right?
Yeah.
That's not open. People think clear. Oh yeah, it's completely clear. No, it's
not a golf
slash
course.
piles. It's hard to walk through.
Yep.
It's difficult to walk through. And so I would pull past this bear a little ways. I'd get everybody out. I'd get either my shotgun or my pistol. I carried a Ruger 480 for a lot of the time. And I kind of get it out so I could get to it quick. And then we would walk kind of in the direction of the bear, parallel to it on the road. And my experience taught me that when you start to get closer to a bear, especially with a group of people like that, we weren't super close, but, we were closer. And the bear knew we were there, obviously, is the bear is not necessarily wanting to be aggressive, but they're wanting to look to a place that they might be able to get away. And they're looking for a place that they can run. And the best place to do that is the road that you're standing on.
Right.
So a lot of times what'll happen is as you walk closer and people are kind of getting pictures, that bear will come straight up onto the road. And with people that didn't have quite the experience that I had with it, they're like, oh my God, that bear's not going away from us. It's coming towards us. And anytime a large predator just even comes at an angle in your direction, you kind of start to hold your breath. And that bear would pop up on the road and I would be between the bear and the people. I'd have my pistol, and the bear would look at us, and usually a very friendly bear. And it would be probably 50 yards off still. And, I'd have the pistol out just in case. And then the bear would usually turn around and walk away or go and do something else or stand up, try to get the idea of what we were, who we were. Bears can count. Bears know when there's like 5 or 6 people. Like statistically, if you have, over 4 or 5 people, you're probably pretty safe.
Yep.
There are circumstances, of course, and variations of that where you're going to want to be careful. A sow with cubs, I would not do that too.
Sure.
An older boar would not put up with that either. The older boar, it doesn't matter how brushy he is, he will go directly away from you. And he's probably not going to be out in the open like that anyways.
Yeah.
But these are like mid-range 4 and 5 year old bears.
Yeah.
Just like kind of goofy, got kicked off their mother not that many years ago or relatively recently. But that was always kind of an interesting example. But as far as close calls go, one time I had a family that was mother, father, and 2 kids. And so that's 5 of us. And I was like, oh, that's bare minimum, right? I can put gas in the van. I can afford, to still exist with the amount of money I'm going to make off of this. I cut them a deal anyways. It was a slow day, right? There were salmon in the river.
Okay.
We traveled a ways to get there. And the jungle in Southeast Alaska is jungle, especially.
Very much so.
Underneath between tree line, which is not that high, maybe 1,000 feet in some places, lower sometimes. And the shoreline, it's thick enough that, you lean against the foliage and you don't go through in some places. Like you just can't get through. So we were down next to a river where I had a trail and they were feeding on salmon. The bears were.
Bear tunnel?
It wasn't exactly a bear tunnel, but it was because I had made it not a bear tunnel with a machete.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Otherwise it would have been, and they're usually, those tunnels or trails that the bears use are usually like 20, 30 yards off the stream.
Right.
And they use those to go real quick up and down the river. If they're traveling the river and there's a big boar in the middle of the river that has a fishing spot that he doesn't want to give up, a younger bear or a sow with cubs will avoid him at all costs. And they'll go into the brush a little ways and then they'll go around him and go upstream. But usually the bears are fat and happy at this point because they're very well fed. The mother and father had these giant camera setups, huge telephoto lenses, because, they're thinking like, how close could we possibly get to these bears? And the answer is quite close, actually. And I had taken them to this little overlook. We had gotten really good photos and from 100 yards, 200 yards away. And the wind was right. All the bears were happy. I was like, oh, cool. So I turned around, and as we're walking out, I don't know if I didn't see him on the way in or he had come in and laid down next to the trail while we had been upriver. But about 3 yards, maybe even closer, I think 3 feet is more accurate, in the tall grass right there next to the trail was this, I would guess a 4 to 5 year old boar.
To borrow a phrase from Peter Hathaway Capstick, halitosis range.
Yeah, bad breath range.
Yeah.
And for sure. And he stood up when we were next to him because he heard us talking or we stepped on something. And he stood up and startled me a bit, right? And I was in the lead with my shotgun. And I distinctively remember having to pull my shotgun back to not touch him.
Yeah.
When I aimed that shotgun at him. Yeah. And it happened relatively quick, obviously. And a lot of things happened.
Did it feel slow?
It felt really slow. Yeah. I can remember every instance of it because what happened next was the little boy took off running past me.
Uh-oh.
And he was wearing a hoodie, thank goodness. So with one hand while I was holding the shotgun, pointed at the bear still, I grabbed his hood and stopped him. And his feet came out from underneath of him. And he kind of stumbled backwards. I just in time to see her turn my head slightly. I caught movement out of the side of my eye, and the little girl passed out and fell over backwards.
Oh, gosh.
And the parents, I could tell what they were doing because I could hear their shutters going off. They were digital cameras, but I could still hear that.
Yeah.
And at that distance, it just had to be fur. There is no way they could focus those big lenses right there. And, that bear probably stood there for 3 seconds, felt like a long time.
Sure. That's a lifetime.
Yep. But he got down. And when he got down, I was paying real close attention to how he got down from standing up.
Right.
And a lot of people that don't have experience with bears think when a bear stands up, he's being aggressive. Not necessarily.
More so curious.
Yeah.
Right?
They just want to see what's going on. And the best way to do that is stand up and look over the grass.
Yep.
And he got down, walked 4 or 5 feet in front of us, kind of in a little circle, got onto the trail so he could run if he needed to. Kind of looked at us. He was standing sideways, which made me a tiny bit nervous because he could kind of start side profiling to make himself look big. And then he got a funny look on his face, took a big dump, and kind of looked at us again and walked away. That was it. That was it. And I am really glad I didn't shoot that bear. Some people might have, just being startled like that.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I was in my 4th year at that point, and I had quite a bit of experience with what you could get away with bears. And the coastal brown bear, in my opinion, in most cases, is mostly fat and happy, especially that time of year when there's salmon in the stream. I don't have any experience with inland grizzlies or even bears that are living in different places that might be genetically different than those particular bears. But those ones, fat and happy, was my experience. Yeah.
Wow, what a story.
I bet
those folks are still telling that story too.
Yeah, for sure. Got that little girl woken up. Yeah, she woke up.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I reckon they got their money's worth.
They did. Yeah. They did. I was like, about that discount.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a proximity tip.
Yeah, but Alaska was a really cool experience, and it was very formative. I was definitely a different person after those 4 years up north.
What about your time in Alaska, especially the hunting and the guiding, or packing, assisting those guided hunts? What did you learn there that informed the way you hunt here on the prairie, which in a lot of ways is radically different?
It is. The amount of patience that you have with somebody is very, very important when it comes to guiding. It's probably one of the most important things. As guides sometime, and I've fell into this before, where sometimes I think it's my hunt, and I'm simply using the hunter as a proxy for myself, and they're the ones pulling the trigger. And that's not necessarily true. It's not. You can get into that mindset, but what that does in many cases is that will increase your anxiety because that hunter's not doing what you want them to do.
Right.
And you need to step back and control your anxiety about that and realize that it's their hunt. You can give them advice, you can encourage them, but it's their decision about what to do. Compared to brown bear, elk are a lot different, but the dynamic is similar in many cases, especially when you're getting set up to pull the trigger. The fact that I can get to a place to shoot from doesn't necessarily mean the hunter can, or in the same amount of time. You do the thing where you're like, okay, if this happens and this happens and this happens, then we can get a shot, right? And you tell that to the hunter, and then when they don't play along with that, the human nature is going to come into play sometimes, and you're going to get anxiety and get stressed out and be like, you got to do this, man. But what you need to do is take a step back and use words of encouragement and not give orders when it comes to that. And say, you know what, if this doesn't work out, we'll go find something else, but let's see if we can make this work, type of thing. And I've been guilty of it before, but remembering to have fun is an awful important aspect to guiding. It really is, because as guides, often you lose track of it being fun, and it starts to become a business. And you're like, I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I have this many days to do this. And if it doesn't happen right then I might have overlapping hunters, and we don't want that. And just remembering to breathe, relax, have fun. This is supposed to be fun. This is hunting. This is a recreational activity,
right?
That somebody is coming for. And remembering bear hunts, it really puts that into perspective, because that was a little bit more serious. The consequences of wounding a bear is a little bit more sometimes than wounding an elk. Although elk have been plenty dangerous in the past, people have found out. Unfortunately, yep. Any large animal with pointy things at their disposal, it can be dangerous.
I think those are all really good pieces of advice and reminders about guiding. I've been guilty of that in the past before, especially in my younger years in guiding, which, I've been doing it for a long time now. I started guiding 25 years ago, but I still make plenty of mistakes. Yeah, maybe more mistakes than ever, or at least I'm more aware of mistakes now.
Keeping those in the back of your mind, and not that you won't repeat them again, but you keep them in the back of your mind, and the next time you're about to do something, it'll probably pop up. And at least for me, it does that. And I always say, I'm going to learn from this. I'm certainly going to learn from this. And I don't always learn from it, but
some things you have to learn more than once.
You do.
It's just how it is.
You do.
I can't remember. I wish I could remember the context of the conversation I was having with Kyle Bratcher one time. I'm sure it was about steelhead. But he said, I forget sometimes how success-oriented you are. Mm-hmm. And it like knocked me on my heels. And I was like, upon what else would you orient yourself? Like, what else is there? And
mission accomplishment.
There's a lot else.
Yep.
There's a lot else.
There's a lot of other factors going into
it. Especially if you're allowing other people to define success for you.
Correct.
And I see that as one of the biggest pitfalls in recreation, especially hunting and fishing. But if you let somebody else to define success for you, and you're at a stage of experience where that's not necessary anymore, you're really being limited. So always define your own version of success and drive towards that. And if somebody's helping you, like a guide or a friend, communicate your own version of success so that you can all be on the same page of trying to accomplish that. But it doesn't mean somebody else's version. It doesn't mean that this bull has 6 points instead of 5 points. It doesn't mean that the configuration of his antlers is going to be measured in a way that equals this quantity. Like that's somebody else's version of success. Define it for yourself, and then you can enjoy these little intangibles, these tiny things along the way that really fill out the experience. And that will last so much longer.
It really will. Chasing scores is difficult.
Yep. I'm over it.
It's one of those things that you fight with back and forth.
Yeah. My scoring system. Have I talked to you about my scoring system?
No,
oh, it's beautiful. Yeah. I'm 100% accurate on it. Yeah.
This is a good bull.
1 or 0.
One or 0.
Binary.
Exactly.
Like, that's it.
Something I wanted to mention was that one of my favorite parts of guiding, no matter how beautiful of a place you live in, and we certainly live in a beautiful place, and we get to guide in some really beautiful country, you become used to it to a certain extent. And I remind myself, obviously, a lot how beautiful it is, but you get used to it and it starts to become a background. And guiding people allows me to see it for the first time through their eyes every time. And,
that vicarious newness of it all.
That new exploration of how beautiful of a place we have here is pretty impressive. That's more than the success each time, more than, getting a big bull or having 100% success rate, more than anything. That's what keeps me wanting to guide, to go back and see that again and again.
I love it.
Yep.
How can people follow along in your adventure?
You can follow me at Zoomwalt Guiding on Instagram, and that's basically where I'm at.
Okay. There's a link to that in the podcast description, as per usual. Encourage you to do it. Tyler has a great presence there on Instagram, shows you a lot of stuff I learned from him all the time. And there are constant refreshers of that beauty that you put out there. And I really appreciate that.
Yep. Thank you so much, James. Appreciate it, dude.
Thanks for the stories, buddy.
Yeah. No. Great to spend some time with you. Hopefully do it again.
Let's do it again.
All right. Take care.
Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.